Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest The Weekend Organist webinar. I'm J.W. Arnold, the AGO's Marketing and Communications Specialist by day and the Music Director at Christ Lutheran Church in Fort Lauderdale on the weekend. And we're so glad to have you tonight. Thanks for making some time out of your busy schedules. I think you're going to find that we have a real treat for you. But before we begin, I want to tell you a very real life story. And this happened to me about 12 years ago. I was the music director at a church here in Fort Lauderdale and had done well for several years until we got a new pastor. And the pastor was definitely on that mindset of moving to contemporary worship in a very traditional congregation. And before long, we had projectors projecting on the walls. We had all the trappings of a much more contemporary service. And finally, the day came when he handed me a photocopied book, probably 50 pages, and it had a whole bunch of lyrics to songs with titles, and some had chords, but I had no idea what to do with it. And I tried to explain to him, this isn't enough for a musician, unless you're someone that plays by ear or comes from that background. And he was very disappointed that he read that answer as a no. From that point, he seemed to feel like I was unwilling to cooperate and didn't want to assist him and be a part of his team. And not surprisingly, well, I was surprised that day, but not surprisingly, I was let go a couple of months later. And that organ got pushed to the wall and they tried having a praise band. And it was a very jarring experience because I consider myself to be a fairly contemporary friendly musician. I came of age in the 80s. I remember Michael W. Smith and Sandy Patty and Amy Grant and really some of those musicians who really made the first crossover with contemporary music in the church. We called it blended worship back then. And so not surprisingly, things have evolved in the 30 years since I became a church musician. And that's the purpose of our meeting tonight. About 6 months ago, I received an email in my inbox from J.W. Pepper. And it was highlighting some of the newest contemporary music and praise music that was available. And I looked at it and sort of scrolled down and listened to a couple of things. And I thought, if I knew about some of these resources, I might have been able to at least tell that pastor, you know what, I'll try something. Let's try, let's see what happens. And I wish that I'd been able to do that because I'm not Mr. No. And so luckily I was able to get in touch with Cynthia Revo, who is a church music consultant for J.W. Pepper, and floated this idea of a webinar where we could talk about what's happening out there in those churches that have experimented and adopted more contemporary music, and how can a church that maybe has traditional organists like you and me incorporate some of that music in and see how it goes. And so tonight is the result of that. And Cynthia's pulled together an amazing team of editors from J.W. Pepper across all the disciplines of church music. And they're here tonight to tell us a little bit about all those questions that we may have. And we're going to get a chance to listen to some samples of some choral and keyboard and handbell music. And also, most importantly, take advantage of the Q&A box. And if you have any questions that come up in the course of the meeting, just pop them in there. And if they can answer, they absolutely will. And if we play Stump the Guest, I'm sure they'll get back to us later. But I think this team's pretty top of the line. They're gonna have it all for us. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Cynthia Revo.
Hi, JW. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. As JW mentioned, we started talking about this 6 months ago.
And you can turn your camera on.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah. We started talking about this 6 months ago, and I was thrilled and excited to be working with him on it. And I said, we will do what we can. Send me send me a list of questions that you would like us to answer, and I will get my church editors, get them working on it, because we have the best editors, I think, in the business. And so that's what we have done. But I wanted, before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. As JW said, I'm the church music editor for Pepper, but how I got here was a little different route than a lot of people would take. My dad started a church or Christian music company back when I was 6 years old. And literally, church music has been my life. It's my heart. I have a passion for it. I Everything I do, I just want to help church musicians, help them find music and what they need. And that's kind of how I started in it, and worked all through high school in the business. And then when I graduated, I went straight into our company business, and that's what I've been doing. So my passion is church music. It is to help church musicians. And so it was a perfect fit when we did close our business after 40 years for me just to go with Pepper. And I'm excited to be here as their church music consultant. But as far as today's topic goes, it's a tough one. There's no easy answer, but our goal today is to help you navigate this process while staying true to who you are. We want to help you move from no to how and feel confident in doing so. And joining with me today, I have Valerie Rozek and Linda Lorgas, our church music editors, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Valerie.
All right, here we go. Got it all organized here. I'm Valerie Rozek. I am the church choral editor at JW Pepper, and I'm happy to be here tonight. Happy to help you all with finding contemporary music that works for your church. I am a church musician. I began my church music career in my teens for my home church, which was a liturgical Lutheran church. I grew up in the Midwest. I played throughout high school and then went on to University at Illinois Wesleyan because I did grow up in Illinois, and that was near and seemed like a good fit. My professor there was David Garenbeck. I don't know if there's anyone here on the AGO, any of you listeners who would happen to know him, but he was my professor. And through life and moves and children and family, played for churches in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and finally ended up permanently here in Pennsylvania, where I have been the organist and choir director of the traditional service for Reformation Lutheran Church in Media, Pennsylvania. So I still playing the organ, added choir responsibilities. But the interesting thing is that my church has a contemporary service. So I have the leader of that service to bounce ideas off of and ask questions of, and that's been very helpful. I'm going to introduce Linda, right? Linda Lorgas. She is also an editor at JW Pepper. She's responsible for keyboard and handbell, and she helps me on the choral side.
Yes, hello. I'm the retired church editor for Pepper, and so I've been working with Valerie the last 2 years. We work together basically. It's a huge area within Pepper, and the church world itself is a huge area, as you know, from the evangelical and the Baptist through all the way, to the other, I'll say the other side of with the Lutheran, Episcopal, and Catholic. So we handle all the repertoire that comes through from all those areas. My specialty at the moment is the organ and piano, and then I'm a handbell person, so I do a lot of the handbell work. My background is also church music. I grew up with a Presbyterian minister father, and my mother was the choir director, so church music was in our home from childhood. And then I also got a degree in organ and church music from Westminster in New Wilmington. My professor was Ray Ocock, and some people know him as well, Raymond Ocock. But my career has been as a choir director organist first in a Presbyterian church where I was principal organist and also directed the youth choirs and handbell choirs. And then for about 10 or 12 years, I was at a Lutheran church and ran the program there. That was a graded choir program. I will say I didn't have a lot of contemporary experience. Neither church had a contemporary service until recently, and I have been dabbling in and helping with those services in both of my former churches. So it's a learning experience, and it's still a learning experience. So I hope that we will have some insights for you. And as Cynthia said, to be able to say, change your no way to how do I do that? And we'll hopefully have some answers for you as to the how.
Well, thank you all for being here. We just really appreciate your time and the effort that you put together to gather this presentation. So let's get started. And we're going to start with one of the questions that I posed to this team. What does the term contemporary worship mean today? How is it different from the blended worship of the 80s and the early 90s?
Okay, I'm going to take that. But before I answer that question, I want to add one more thing about my background. As you heard from Valerie and Linda, they have the more traditional background. I do have a contemporary background, and I play keys in our praise band at church. So we feel like we complement each other really well. We kind of understand all sides of it, and hopefully we can share some ideas that you can take and use in your ministry. But the blended worship in the 80s and 90s, for me, and what I experienced was it was more traditional where you'd sing a hymn, and that would be accompanied by a piano and organ. You might have an opening prayer and a welcome, and then you would sing several choruses. They would probably still be accompanied by the piano and organ, but we would add drums, guitar, rhythm section, but it was kept separate. It wasn't incorporating like now sometimes is done. Then there'd be a solo, and the solo might be contemporary, it might be a more traditional solo, and then you had the message. But that's kind of the blended that I grew up with. But Linda has some different ideas with blended and into the contemporary, and I'm going to let her kind of give you some of her thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you. Blended sometimes today has I'll say it has a bad flavor. It leaves a bad flavor in people's mouths because you try to take two different genre and put them together in the same service, and you get a little bit of liturgical whiplash, and neither side is happy because it's not all their kind of music. So blended, I think today might not be the best choice to use, and yet there are some churches doing a fine job of it in dovetailing the two styles. So we have a list we can send you later of some churches' live streams that we recommend that you listen to to get some ideas on how to do this well. A little bit about the word contemporary, and I know there's contemporary is pretty much anything that happens today, music written today, whatever the genre. But for the purpose of this webinar, for this discussion, we're going to say that contemporary is something that is a service that uses a praise team. That might be guitar, it might be piano, electric bass, other instrumentation, soloists or singers standing up at a microphone rather than a choir, although there is contemporary choir music, and we'll get into that later. But just to set that, I'll say discussion aside, that we're not talking about contemporary in terms of what's written today so much as this style of worship that is known as contemporary. And Valerie, I think you're going to discuss a little more about the praise teams, perhaps.
Yes, you did mention some about the praise team. A praise team would use a guitar, a drum set, maybe a bass, a keyboard or piano, and would have vocals. So as many, what we would say choir members, but vocalists as possible who would be able to help out. Some use a whole choir, and we would probably call that a large choir worship team if you're lucky enough to have enough members to have a large choir. Some need a soloist, and praise teams also are group led. Most use piano and lead from there. The piano is important. The piano can be in the absence of drums. If your congregation or your assembly is not allowed to have a drum or a drum set, the piano can provide the rhythm, the driving force, and also learning new music from the piano. I think if you have the piano leading, that helps build trust with your congregation, and it's easier to learn new music if your pianist or your keyboardist introduces music and there's response from the congregation. So a lot going on. I think that I think probably we can move on to the next slide because we're going to keep talking about praise teams. So that's great.
Right. And so you've given us a good picture. So how are these contemporary praise teams being used in churches today?
I think it varies by situation. Some have a whole choir, some have just a piano and maybe a few vocalists, or you could have the drum set or a percussion section, instrumentation. I think it just varies by situation, from the whole praise team and a large band or orchestra to as many as just a few who are able to lead the congregation.
Right. And in this question, I guess I didn't ask it quite right, but contemporary worship songs, the songs that people listen to on the radio, how are they being used in the service?
In contemporary service, or no, Cynthia was going to speak to this, but I think
yeah.
she may be having one. She was going to talk about the modern hymns. This may not be exactly what you were asking, but to back up just a little bit, we were talking about the fact that a lot of the contemporary songs of today that are used in contemporary worship really have stood the test of time of 40 and 50 years. So they've almost become mainstream hymns, some of them. So they're still considered contemporary, but they're being used in traditional services in a more traditional manner. Is that part of what your answer is? Cynthia or Valerie, did I interrupt you? Were you going to say more about that?
No, I think Cynthia was going to help out with that one. You're right about that, but we
Maybe coming on.
Wait for her to come back. There she is.
Hey.
Sorry, guys. I'm trying. Okay. One of the ways that I see directors incorporating contemporary worship is to lean heavily excuse me, towards modern hymns like Keith and Kristen Getty, Matt Papa, Matt Boswell, City of Light, as they kind of resemble the traditional hymns, both melodically and lyrically. And then, later in the presentation, we're going to show you some of these, some original pieces also that are contemporary in nature. And they're not necessarily contemporary hits, but they're still good options for you.
One of the ways too we're talking about bringing in is that there's some objection sometimes to the lyrics or the texts of some of the contemporary, but some of the melodies are gorgeous. And as Cynthia's talking about, some of the older hymns that have stood the test, older contemporary songs that have stood the test of time, can be incorporated in worship through your wordless music. You can use an instrumental prelude with a flute taking the melody and with a piano accompaniment. We have examples of those. You might have handbells playing I Will Rise or something of that nature. You might have the organ. There's a lot of organ collections coming along that have contemporary songs arranged for organ. And I realize that sounds a little like an oxymoron to those of us who are organists, and it's either us or them. We're organist or praise team. But I think what we're trying to show, or we'd like to show, is that you can start to incorporate without violating the organist's oath of the organ and running the show in the service. So wordless, I'll just say wordless music is helpful. Piano and organ and instrumental and handbell, that might be useful it begins to get some of those melodies into the brain of your congregation as well as yours. And the more familiar you become, the less antagonistic you are, because all of a sudden, oh, I know that's familiar. I've heard that. Where have I heard that before? So that's one way to start getting things into your brain and your congregation's brain.
Great. Let's take a look at the next question. So, obviously our members, most are pretty musically trained. They're very good at reading from scores. But how can a traditional musician learn about contemporary worship practices and styles?
I can take this one as well, but I think we had some other points we might bring up in a little while about instrumentation. So we'll circle back to that in a few minutes. The way we learn anything is we listen, we look, we try, we learn. I mean, as beginning children learning music, you hear music, you want to go to the piano, you kind of experiment, you play. I think listening, especially to this style of music, is critical to beginning to understand it. Even if it isn't music that you prefer or are familiar with, begin to listen to it. We were talking about this earlier, that it's not, my suggestion is to listen in small doses, because when you learn anything new, if you're inundated with it, it becomes just blah, blah, blah. You don't hear it anymore. So there are many different radio stations out there that have Christian contemporary music running on that. Listen to those, maybe go to CCLI and find which is the website where we report music, but they also list the top 100 songs that are used these days. So pick 5 of them maybe and go search them out and try to listen to them. But I do suggest doing it in small doses. And the analogy we were using is, if you're learning a language, if you're learning Greek, you don't listen to an hour of somebody talking Greek because it's all Greek to you. But if you listen to it in little bits at a time, after a while, it starts to accumulate and you start to appreciate the heart of the music, that it means something to a lot of different people. So don't just poo-poo it. It's got to be something that requires understanding in little doses for us who have different ears right now.
JW mentioned lead sheets. Lead sheets are still out there. So one way to conquer a lead sheet is to brush up on your chord knowledge so that you can play chords along with the melody, because that's what a lead sheet is melody, lyrics, and harmony. Cynthia tells me that nowadays you can purchase music in full score. So that's really come a long way, that we can have a pretty well fleshed out accompaniment to go along with what used to just be a lead sheet. Also familiarize yourself with the terms, verses, chorus, bridge. Sometimes contemporary music can be tricky to follow. And then practice. Write out some parts, write out, some things that you think would fit well in the music that you're learning and you're going to share with the praise team and with the congregation. Just like anything else we would do, practicing is going to be the ticket.
You're so right about that.
I put on a song and I try to play with it occasionally, just because there's a style that's not embedded in my viscera that just would be just playing along with it in the privacy of my own home, but put it on and just see if you can imitate what's going on and understand and follow the patterns. So as Valerie said, it's practicing.
Yep. So let's take a next. I know it makes people cringe. They've got drums and guitars in the church, I think there are plenty of psalms that praise the drums and the cymbals and all of that. So
Lyre.
the lyre, yep, the trumpet. But is there a place for the organ in contemporary music today?
Yes, there is. I think the first part of your question is, do we have to incorporate drums and guitars? And I think, Valerie, you were going to speak to that first.
Sure. Yes, I can. So not everyone's clergy will allow you to have a drum or a drum set in your sanctuary, and that's perfectly fine. An option that might work is an instrument called a cajon. And I don't know if anyone has ever used a cajon, but it is a box-shaped wooden instrument that comes from Peru. And it's small, and you kind of play the rhythm by using the palms of your hands on the frame of this instrument. So that's an option. Guitars are not essential. You don't have to have a guitar. but using the piano or the keyboard is key. The piano provides the pulse and adds the percussion element to it in the absence of drums. So the piano also supports the congregational singing. So the piano, or leading to Linda, the organ is still necessary, of course.
I think you can incorporate organ pretty well into a praise and worship or a blended or even a contemporary service. But you have to be true to the instrument's purpose and what it can do to help the service. The organ, among other things, is a color instrument. It can add some of those solo lines that if you don't have a saxophone or an oboe, or well, not oboe in contemporary, but the organ can add that solo line. It can provide use the strings on the organ to simulate the synth. A lot of music is calling for a synth. Use your organ for that. You don't have a bass player? Well, guess what? We have pedals with the, 16. The bass line can be duplicated on the organ and just playing along. When it goes to a refrain portion of the song, the organ can kick in and support the singing, and the sound will just will fill in the spaces. So, and the organ can also be used as a solo instrument, as we said, with introducing the melodies. I know that's not as common in contemporary worship, but yes, I think there is still a place for the organ.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, Jay.
We also have a question in the Q&A. Maybe we might want to answer. So this is from an anonymous attendee, and they're saying, thanks for this workshop. I'm a composer and organist who regularly improvises preludes and postludes on praise and worship songs in our contemporary service. I want to write them down and publish them for other organists to use, but how do you get past the hurdle of using copyrighted melodies? Could you please explain how licensing might work for arranging postludes using those themes?
That's a great question and a tricky one. Copywriting it's a webinar of its own, honestly, to talk about how to do that. When you play it for your own service, if you're not live streaming, you can go ahead and compose and arrange and play for your worship service. The minute it goes live, however, there are all kinds of rules in place, even not just publishing, but playing them live, that you have to get permissions to do that. So we probably ought to put out, we do have a link somewhere, and maybe we need to make a note talking about copywriting and how to copyright or how to get permissions for copywriting. But I don't know that we can answer that fully. We're going to say we'll try to get an answer for you.
That's a great question, and you're right. It's a whole webinar. With all one thing I can tell you is that our members are pretty familiar with CCLI. After COVID came and worship services moved to streaming and YouTube, so I think we can jump into that. But to keep the conversation moving, you've put together a really great list of resources of contemporary music that could work for traditional musicians, contemporary anthems for choir. Would you like to speak a little bit about your list, and then we can take some time to listen to a few?
Sure. I'll start off, since it's the contemporary anthems for choir, we will have the ability to listen to the first three on this list. And I chose the first one, I Set My Hope on Jesus, because it is words and music by Keith Getty, Matt Boswell, and Matt Papa. They are top-notch composers, arrangers in contemporary music, and would maybe be considered a little more hymn-like, modern hymn-like. It has a modern message. This particular one, I Set My Hope on Jesus, for people struggling with their faith. So the subject matter of some of these contemporary choral arrangements deals with more modern problems. This uses acoustic instruments in orchestration, has the modern message, as I said, and uses modern language. And the arranger, Sean Paul, he just writes a great arrangement. The second one, Come to Jesus, Rest in Him, is words and music by Jordan Coughlin and Matt Merker. This is arranged by Lloyd Larson, and probably quite a few of you are familiar with Lloyd Larson and his music, not only his own original things, but his arrangements. He does fantastic arrangements of traditional hymns, arrangements for handbell. He's just really a great guy and does great work. This one is piano with optional rhythm. And the third one that I chose, Shelter of Salvation, is words and music by Brad Nix. And this is a completely original choral anthem. It's not based on a contemporary song or a radio hit or a popular tune from CCLI. And I just wanted to use this as an example that there's really nice music out there that's written for your choir that I think you really like. When you listen to this, you'll understand that this could be in a traditional or a contemporary setting, and I think your congregation would be happy. And then the rest of them, they're popular. I think that we're not going to have time to go through them all today, but they have arrangers that are popular in the contemporary music world: Heather Sorensen, Mary McDonald, Jay Rouse. Those are probably familiar names for some of you. And I think if we're ready, we could listen. This is the first one, I Set My Hope on Jesus. This is a new one. We're in the last review season. This came out in our spring catalog for Easter and Lent.
When the sight of trials tests my faith, I set my hope on Jesus. When the questions come and doubts remain, I set my hope on Jesus. For the deepest wounds that time won't heal, there's a joy that runs still deeper. There's a truth that's more than I feel. I set my hope on Jesus.
I think that's lovely. The orchestration is really special and makes it, but you could do it with just piano.
One thing just to add to that is if you choose to do these, for contemporary people, they might think these are watered down versions of the contemporary songs, but that's kind of what makes them palatable to the traditional service. And the other thing is just to make sure that you sing these with more of a relaxed tone rather than trying to sing all the syncopations exactly accurately the way we might have been taught. So just conversational. I've been told it has to be conversational. So it's just a slightly different style of choral music. Go ahead.
Are you weary, heavy laden? Come and lay your burdens down. Jesus calls you, Jesus draws you, rest in Him. He is gentle, He is lowly, He delights to bring us peace. Tender shepherd, mighty Savior, rest in Him. How sure His compassion for us, oh how
one of the things we look for when we're reviewing contemporary music is that the message or the text has value. Sometimes it can be too simple and nothing is gained by listening to it or speaking it or having it read. So the text is important, and not all texts are created alike. I hope you enjoy these selections.
The God of love has drawn me near, casting out my doubt and fear. And now I rest beneath the tree where the Savior died for me. All glory to the Son, all praise and adoration. The strong and mighty one, the shelter of salvation.
That one is originally composed by Brad Nix, and Linda and Cynthia and I have met him. He's in Austin, Texas. He's a very devout man and writes a heartfelt lyric, I believe. And there are lots like that. Pepper's website has just a lot of music that you can listen to, and these are some selections from the website.
We got a question just a couple moments ago from Carolyn Boxmeyer, and she asks, how do you get over the complex rhythms in contemporary music and getting the congregation to sing along? I find I need to calm the syncopations down a bit. And I think you really answered that for us just now, because all of those samples that you presented to us, I mean, they're written in octavo form. There weren't a lot of those kind of really challenging pop music kind of rhythms. I mean, even for choir members that aren't familiar with contemporary music, they're going to be able to translate that score into a beautiful song.
I think that's true, right? That the rhythms can be tricky, and that's where having a good person on the piano to lead the congregation, to give it, to sit there and play it through in a way that they can hear it and understand it and be able to sing it back. And the same thing works for a choir, to have good leadership.
And I'll add, I'm in I would call it a contemporary blended service. And I do feel like there are times that the reason the congregation isn't singing, it's not necessarily the rhythms as much as some of our instruments are just covering up and you can't hear them, and they can't hear themselves. So I think it's good to be aware of that. And when you do it more acoustically, like with just the piano, you don't have that situation. And I don't know if that's this situation, but that's just something to keep in mind in general. Don't drown your congregation out with the music, because that's kind of, sometimes I feel like that happens sometimes in our service.
That's an excellent point. And you are talking to organists who love to crank up the organ. So I think we can relate to that. Let's take a look at the next selections of music you picked for us. These are contemporary piano arrangements.
Yes, there are a number of these, and we're going to maybe play one or two. That we don't have a lot of recordings of these or recordings that match the PDFs, but we'll certainly try to put that. One of the things I was going to comment on is to look for the names that are working in the contemporary world who do these nice arrangements. So you have Mark Hayes, that he's of course a name I think most people recognize, and this collection is probably our top seller in this genre. We don't have any recordings for PDF to share with you, but make a note of that if you're looking for something that others have found successful, that is certainly one of them. The second book, God So Loved, James Kurtz, who sadly passed away last summer, a year ago summer, but this is a very fine collection of useful pieces to use throughout your worship service. I think a lot of these are reflective, and I don't know if we want to play them as we get to them or wait till the end of the list. Dan, could you play the selection from God So Loved? Being played during communion as people are gathering at the beginning of a service. Maybe during a prayer time, a call to prayer. That's probably enough on. Thanks. Yes. Again, it's a wordless communion of that music. If you know the words, you'll hear them in your head. But even if you don't know them, you're beginning to get that melody in your head for maybe a future learning of that piece of music. But I think there's a serenity to that piece that could be used for many different times during your service. The Lord is My Salvation is Molly Iam's collection, and this piece, which let me know, Dan, when you're ready to play it. But this is a little more upbeat. It's a Getty Townend piece out of this. So if you're ready, I'm ready.
It's very Celtic in style, isn't it?
The Gettys are from Ireland.
The joy to this, you can enjoy. Thank you. Thank you. I asked him to make sure that if he went through that key change that we resolved it. And thank you for that. But this could be a great gathering song, a prelude as people are coming in, depending on the or time. If you're collecting the, sometimes people during stewardship time will bring up their pledges to the front of the church during playing some music. And this might be a time to play that. It just gets you moving, gets you up and going. So names to look for. We're not going to play more of this list, but you can see the list of names, and they are some of the top names in writing contemporary arrangements for piano and organ for contemporary. So you've got Mark Hayes, Lord Larson, Molly Iams, James. We have Philip Kevrin, not on this list, but another good one. Mary MacDonald, I think she's there somewhere. Larry Shackley, Jay Rouse. So if you see those names on a collection, give it a second look. And there are some new names coming down the pike as well that we tried as much as we can to listen to all the different new folks coming in and be able to incorporate them. So that's piano and organ. I think we've done piano and organ. Yes, or have we gotten to organ yet? Okay, we're doing this now. Again, we don't have a lot of recordings that go along with the PDFs, but if you take a look at some of these names again, I will comment on some of the titles. I had to be careful picking because 20 years ago, somebody would put out new contemporary music, and it's now 20 years old. So be careful when you look at a title to make sure that if it says new, that it perhaps is something from this decade. But having said that, there's an awful lot of the classical, this is an oxymoron again, classical contemporary titles, things that were in the 80s and 90s that are still being played, even things from 5, 8, 10 years ago. I want to say something like well, in Christ Alone, of course, but 10,000 Reasons, I Will Rise. There's a number of older contemporary songs that now can be considered staples. Again, it's hard to know what word do we use, because we're considering contemporary being that genre more than we are when it was written. So I think, Dan, we have a piece, one of these. Do we not have one of these to play? I think that this is In Christ Alone. Thank you. Again, we don't offer, some of our products don't correlate between the printed page and the recording that were sent to us by the publisher. So I apologize for not having that a good representation for you of that. But that particular collection, that comes from Hymns for Praise and Worship by Linda Leatherman, is a nice collection of pieces that sound like authentic organ music, but it's using contemporary songs. So something of that. I might also mention that some of the choral anthems that Valerie was presenting, they can very easily be translated into an organ piano duet, so that you can just have your organist playing the choral parts and your piano handling the percussive piano part. You create a lovely duet out of that. And again, you're getting the ears acquainted with those melodies. But we often, as organists, have to make something out of nothing, a few notes, and all of a sudden we've got to play for 10 minutes. So contemporary songs can be used also as your inspiration for what I'll call and not doodle music, but sometimes you have to just fill in those couple of minutes with something, and they work for that. So can we move then to handbell music? I don't know whether our wunderkind behind the scenes is handling all the recordings, and I want to make sure I'm not going ahead of him.
I neglected to introduce Dan McCaffrey, who's the AGO's membership and information technology specialist on the staff, and he's working behind the scenes to keep us all on track and juggling screens and watching the questions and the comments. And so thank you, Dan, for your help tonight. We really appreciate it. We couldn't do this without you.
Of course. And I think we did have one more organ piece to listen to if we want to take a listen.
That'd be great. Thank you. Yes, this collection, Anna Laura Page, and I think she just put out another one that we just saw last week. She blends traditional hymns with contemporary songs, and she will it's not a medley. It'll be two songs that kind of match each other, and she does nice arrangements for the organ. And this is one example of that. And then the contemporary, yeah, she'll go back and forth between two pieces of music. So, and there are a number of her collections that are available out there. Just quickly moving on to the other wall called wordless music. There's handbell music and there's instrumental music out there. We're just now revising our website, so we're hoping to provide a whole section for just contemporary that'll include all this instrumentation. But so all of these, Peggy Betcher is a name that's been well known in the handbell world for years. She's done a lot of contemporary arrangements, and you can see others, Linda Lamb and of course Joel Rainey. And the example we're going to use right now is I Will Rise. this I find it's not just a lovely handbell piece, but he adds a bit of synthesizer to it, which is a contemporary sound, but the organ could also provide this underpinning. So let's hear a little of that, please. Okay, I think we can, yeah. And that goes on, that builds, and again, it's one of our top sellers. The lists that are provided for you in the instrumental side are sorted. Basically, these are the top sellers for us right now. So if you are looking for things that other people have found successful, these might be a good starting point for finding words that or finding music that you can use in your services. I think there was one more slide, but we're not going to maybe play anything that was of instrumental pieces. And did that next, perhaps? Making Dan work fast here. Oh, no. Well, there is a list, and we can send that to you another time.
Yeah, and for everyone that registered for the webinar, we will be sending out the recording tomorrow or Wednesday, along with the slides and the information. So if you didn't catch the links, and we'll make sure that you get them and have a chance to go. We're so appreciative of the Pepper team for setting up these pages for us, so you can actually go on the links and see the curated selections that they've pulled for us on those. So I believe this might be our last question. What advice do you have for the traditional musician who's asked to incorporate contemporary music into their service? I think we know a little bit more than we did before, at least.
My advice would be, rather than your immediate reaction to this question being no, before saying no, just understand who's requesting the change and what they feel is missing from the current service. As we mentioned earlier, contemporary can be interpreted in many different ways. The person requesting the change maybe just be talking about maybe including How Great Thou Art and not in a certain way, and not wanting a truly contemporary service with guitar, drums, etc. Again, just know exactly what you're asking for and why, and don't just change your service without knowing what was really asked. Valerie, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I actually am going to jump down to take the time to learn the contemporary style. As we've already talked about, just listening through the music that you find is the best way to decide what would work best for your congregation. If you want something, that's really off the CCLI top 100, that's one thing. But if you want something that's a little older, in a style that's maybe a little friendlier to your congregation, there's a lot of music out there. So take the time to listen.
And for those who maybe say, no, I don't want to do contemporary, if you look at those choral anthems, some of those are very, what I'll call traditional anthems. They just happen to be based on contemporary songs. You could just consider this as a way to expand your repertoire choices. That in the same way that you'll select anthems that might rotate through the traditional, I'll call traditional anthem, or romantic with organ, or spirituals, or Renaissance, pick a contemporary anthem as part of your rotation when you're selecting your choir anthems, and just begin to get the it's a style. It's just a new, put it in your toolbox as yet another style to use. And the other thing is, and we've all referenced this throughout, make sure the texts are meaningful, that there's a lot of texts, not just contemporary, but other older pieces where the text is a little questionable theologically, or perhaps even the tone of it. So select texts that are worthy for your choir and your congregation. And I would say don't reject something just because it repeats a phrase over and over again, because Randall Thompson's Alleluia repeats something over and over again. And if you do Taizé worship, it's the repetition of a phrase or a text or scripture that gets into your viscera. So we want to make sure what gets in there is worthy. So I think that's some of our comments.
Those are just great, great, great words of advice. And I certainly hope that none of our viewers today or in the future find themselves in the position I was in. And I think if I'd had this webinar a few years ago, I would have made it through that situation. Obviously J.W. Pepper is one of the biggest names in music out there, sheet music, and so maybe take a moment to tell us a little bit about how J.W. Pepper can help us.
We had a couple points. The first one was mine. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking the whole, but editor's choice is something that is a result of our review process. When we review music, which we're in a review season right now, publishers send us tons of pieces, hundreds of pieces of music, and we have teams of editors that listen to it all and evaluate things that come out that are not only worthy, but are also something we think our customer can use, is what gets the editor's choice. So take a look at that list.
We also have a new email newsletter that we put out beginning in the month of July this past summer. This newsletter is for church musicians. It will offer a blog on a particular topic, and this week's blog, actually to come out tomorrow, is about abundance. And it will also include some product links, and contemporary music is a product link on tomorrow's newsletter. But we're trying to reach church musicians in a different way. And we're trying to let you know that we are church musicians ourselves, and we know what it's like. And we've been in the trenches, and we're trying to encourage you as you are doing your job, because it's a ministry. And we understand that, and we're hoping that the Rhythm of Worship email can help give you some support in that way. I also want to say that on our website, under the part of the website that houses our blogs, we have blogs from a lot of people, and they are contemporary musicians. We have Keith Getty, we have Pepper Choplin, we have Cliff Duran. Cliff Duran just wrote a blog for our newsletter, The Rhythm of Worship. So there are resources on our website and a lot of information that contemporary composers have shared with us. And that would be a great place to go to learn more about contemporary worship, composers' inspiration, why they do what they do. And that could definitely be a help to all of you.
Let me just, I know we're about out of time, so I won't go into details, but we also have a new Facebook page. And I will tomorrow, the next couple of days, I'll send you some links to these pages so that you can connect with them. And I just want to close with, if you ever need our assistance, you have our contact information on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. We want to help you any way we can. And if you can't find what you're looking for or have a specific question or problem, please reach out to us. We hope that we've given you tools and tips that will help you moving forward. And once again, JW, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity.
Oh, Thank you to each of you. And we had some technical difficulties a couple of weeks ago, and I appreciate your flexibility as we came back and got this done. And just want to let you know how much we appreciate the insights you've given us, the resources that we can use. I've already gotten a couple of messages thanking the three of you for such great, useful information. So we appreciate it. And for everyone that's watching, we'll be doing some more Weekend Organist webinars in the coming months, and watch the monthly column in the American Organist magazine. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you, Dan McCaffrey, for your support behind the scenes, and everyone have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thanks for the emojis.
Thank you.